Welcome to the Best Team Wins podcast with Adam Robinson. He's talking to today's industry leaders and entrepreneurs about the people side of their business.
Welcome to the Best Team Wins podcast, where we feature entrepreneurs and business leaders whose exceptional approach to the people side of their business has led to incredible results. My name is Adam Robinson, and for the next 25 minutes, I'll be your host as we explore how to build your business through better hiring. Today on the program, Susan Beth is the Chief Operating Officer at NRD Capital, based in Atlanta, Georgia. She's been there since 2014, working with founder Aziz Hashim, two of them together, legends in the franchising industry, and are taking a look at some of the biggest opportunities in helping franchise brands scale through better systems, process, and resources. So, Susan, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Some fun facts about you I found on the internet. Not really. These are things I know about you. Susan has been in business since 19 when she bought her first Superwash franchise, which was a family business. She was required to be a franchisee before she could be in the business. Bought 2 more locations and eventually became Chief Operating Officer of Superwash. She founded Franchise Capital Exchange, a premier franchise and private equity deal-making event, which is still going on. And I think Susan has won every award possible. Most recently named by 1851 magazine as a young one to watch in 2016, and 2017 named an emerging leader by the M&A Advisor. She's won everything and has deservingly so won everything. Susan was our opening keynote at Hierology's internal company kickoff this year. So we love you here at Hierology. So we're so glad you're here on the show.
Thank you.
So we're here to talk about the people side of your business. But before we dive in, set the stage for us. Give us 30 seconds on what you're doing at NRD and the things that people need to know about you.
Yeah, so NRD is a private equity fund that is focused primarily on making investments in franchisors. And we do 2 kind of main types of investing. One is revitalizations. So if you think about Frisch's Big Boy Restaurants, which was our first acquisition in 2015, or you think about Ruby Tuesday, which was probably our largest transaction that we'll do for a while, that happened in December of 2017. Those are both considered revitalizations, really strong brands, great storied history, and we think a lot to grow from, but just needed to get back on a different track. So those are the revitalization buckets, and the others are straight growth plays. So really cool brands like Fuzzy's Taco Shop, a brand we just made an investment in Toronto called the Captain's Boil, and some technology investments that we have as minority positions that we're really excited about how these can grow and scale and make an impact. And so not just restaurants, but we've done restaurants to date. So hopefully here in the next 60 days or so, you're going to hear me making an announcement about our first non-food investment. So we're all pretty excited about that. And I'm thrilled to be getting back to the service retail side of the franchise world, since that's where I grew up and where I came from.
Hey, very cool. All right. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
If listeners want to learn more about what you're up to, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, NRDcapital.com is a great way. We also do a little bit of posting to our Facebook page under NRD Capital, and also on LinkedIn is another space for us. So those are kind of the main places you'll see it. When we make investments, you can see it splashed all over the place because we've worked on them for a long time, and we're always glad when they get closed.
You've been in franchise operations on all sides of the equation for a lot of years. And so talk to me about the similarities you see in organizations that build great teams from, your time as an operator and now your time as an investor. What are some of the things that you tend to see as common threads when you see a great team?
Yeah, it's been one of the biggest learnings of the last 4 years, coming from the franchisor side of the business over to the investor side of the business, is that, we can underwrite a deal 7 ways to Sunday, and in the Excel spreadsheet, everything can look like it's going to work fantastic. And at the end of the day, Adam, it doesn't matter how great the Excel spreadsheet is. If you don't have the team there that can execute none of it really matters. It's just a spreadsheet. And so that's been one of the greatest continued learnings, is just how crucial these teams are, and that it really does take a different type of leadership based on a bunch of different factors, right? I mean, Frisch's Big Boy Restaurants is in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's a very distinct culture in that part of the Midwest. And so to bring in a leader that maybe grew up in California or New York or some of the more, just fast-paced, heavy-hitting, aggressive environments wouldn't have fit the culture there, and probably wouldn't have worked out as well. Then you take a Ruby Tuesday, and we needed a leader exactly like the CEO that we found and that we were able to bring onto the team to lead that turnaround. And his name's Ray Blanchette. And Ray is absolutely fantastic at looking at all sides of the business. He's a strong financial mind, strong marketing mind, all things we needed, in addition to a great ops guy that grew up in casual dining restaurants, to really have the full picture about how you turn that big of a ship around and get it sailing in the right direction. And then, of course, I'm thinking about a Fuzzies right now, and our president down there, just, an amazing culture builder. And he is so true to that culture. And that was really important to us. We did not want to be the private equity group that stepped in and made changes for the sake of change, because that culture had been working so well. And we really needed that continued leadership there. So it's really all about finding the right team for the right environment to help the investment be successful, but also the franchisees to be as successful as possible in the world we operate in.
So let's talk about that. A reason why you invest in a team and a reason why you don't invest in a team. First, what's something that when you see it, you've got the right team in place heading into a deal?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I don't even know that I've given it that much thought. Sometimes it's a little bit intuitive. But I would say, look, when folks really know their business, and you can go to all parts of the organization and there's a respect and there's just an appreciation for what's been built, and there's a clear direction on what happens going forward. Transparency, I would say, is a big thing. We hear that a lot about why folks didn't like a certain type of leadership, is because they didn't know which end was up, and they didn't know what was coming, and that there wasn't a clear direction every day. There was a little bit of flip-flopping going on. So those are some of the things we look for. And of course, just a continued passion for the brand and the service that's being provided, the food that's being served, and the franchisees and the business investments that they've made. And I think that's been another great learning of the last 4 years, is that there's not many other businesses that private equity places money into that has the real human connection that franchising has, right? There's not a lot of other businesses that operate this way.
Absolutely not. And now allow me to ask you a totally leading question here, but the transparency, and other guests have talked about it on this show, and our listeners, who are out there growing businesses today, are always after this culture that helps them create competitive advantage.
Sure.
And one of the things that keeps coming up on the show through guests like yourself is this notion of transparency breeding a culture of trust, and that really incentivizing people to give it their all because they know for whom they're giving it and why. But transparency is a result of systems and process. Like, you cannot be transparent if you cannot report on what's happening. And so would you agree that transparency, when it exists, is often just a leading indicator that the underlying business has got strong management? I mean, you can't really, you got to have the systems to be able to tell the story.
Well, and I don't disagree at all, but I would add on to that by saying, and you got to be willing to call a spade, right? And so I think that's another part of the transparency piece, is that a lot of times leadership only feels that they're there to report out the good news, but that's hard to build trust when all you deliver is good news, right? You got to be willing to share the bumps along the way and the hurdles that you're facing so that people really know the task ahead of them. And, I teach a class, or I used to teach a class called The 7 Secrets of Dynamic Franchise Cultures. And one of those is, when you have room to talk about what's going on, do. And that's a more specific trait for franchisors, because you can't always talk about things that are coming down the pike or what's happening in the background. Those things are sometimes very confidential and can't be disclosed until they're final. But when you have the opportunity to share, do and sing it from the mountaintops. And that's part of the way that people will, they'll absolutely go to battle with you. And, most people will tell you that I wear my heart on my sleeve, and you never have to wonder what I'm thinking because it's written all over my face. And that is very true. You know that about me as well. But I think it's part of, the way that I earn people's trust is that if they ask me a question, I'm going to do my darndest to tell them exactly the best answer I can.
So what about the other side of the ledger then tips you off that things may not quite be right? Is there something you see in a meeting or a feeling that you get that tell you that the opposite is true, that in fact it may not be as great as the folks pitching the business are leading you to believe?
Yeah, generally for me, it's that I tend to have conversations with all levels of the organization. So my conversations very rarely stop with just the leadership. And so a lot of times people feel that they want to share, they can add more to it. And I'm not on a digging mission. I'm just simply trying to verify, the information that we've been given. I've certainly been in situations across my career, and this is not just in my time at NRD Capital by any means, but wolf in sheep's clothing. Right. And I think that's one of the biggest detriments is as we move up the leadership chain, and I will include myself in this as a reminder to myself to hopefully not get here. But as we move up the leadership chain, we start to buy our own press. That we don't make mistakes, that we are as great as our press release says we are, our bio says we are. And that can get dangerous. And so we always need somebody to kind of check us back. But if I get that, again, intuition is a big thing for me. If I get that intuition that maybe things are looking better than they might be, I tend to just ask more questions. And, I've missed several times, of course, too. But those are the things that where I just go, man, that sounds too good to be true. Let's ask some more detailed questions around it. Man, I hope we don't all start buying our own press, though. That can get dangerous.
That is correct. And so particularly for me, I don't believe anything I read about myself. It's
well, and you said in the opening, right, that you learned those few things about me on the internet. And of course, anything you read on the internet is true, so that you can believe.
Yeah, exactly right. That is exactly right. So you mentioned that you have, in a couple of these anecdotes, hired people to come in and fill leadership roles in companies. I know you've done that at Superwash numerous times over the years. Getting really tactical here, what are the one or two things you love to ask that help you really get at the essence of whether somebody's a good fit, either culturally or philosophically, the soft stuff that often derails otherwise good leaders?
One of my favorite questions is, are you the person that leaders learn from, or are you the leader that learns from others?
What do you want to hear there?
I want to hear both. I want to hear both, right? I think all of us are at our very best when we're on the tipping point of learning something new. And my leaders, I want them always to be open, especially, again, I'm speaking specific to a franchise audience here, but I want a leader to always be open to that franchise community, learning from them, being open-minded, not just this, it's my way or the highway. But I also want them to be able to command the respect and that they lead in such a way that people want to follow, right? That you want to follow. And I think that's one of my greatest blessings of this 4 years at NRD Capital, and certainly my time at Superwash. I mean, I've been so fortunate to work with just some amazing people, but is that I've always wanted to learn from them. And I hope that there are things that they want to learn from me or that I might be able to share with them. And so that's one of the main things I love to ask. I love to go through and ask people that very basic question of, what do you think your greatest opportunity for improvement is? Right? And then I ask their references the same thing. And so that's always a little bit of an interesting turning point too. And it seems like every time I'm hiring, because I do the majority of our executive hiring for the NRD Capital portfolio companies in the event that we're bringing in management teams and that management isn't already there. And so it's a little bit of a shift depending on each position, right? If I'm hiring a CEO or a president versus a chief operating officer versus a lead finance person, each of those questions is tapered a little bit differently. And again, a lot of it is just, it's as much, Adam, about their tenor And how do they approach things? Are they more, fast paced? Are they more heavy hitting? Are they a little more soft spoken? Are they just a no BS, or is there a polish around things a little bit more? And it's truly trying to fit the right person in the right spot. So you've often heard me use the analogy square peg, round hole, right? I'm looking for square peg, square hole, round peg, round hole, as often as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you are building your leadership teams, then both in the existing organization and at NRD, which is itself growing, I
Yeah.
mean, what do you have, top of mind as you're scaling the organizations?
Yeah, top of mind for me is always trying to find a culture fit, right? With one person, whether you mean to or you don't, with one person, you can completely change the culture of an organization. And, certainly at NRD Capital, we're a group of operators and we have strong finance backgrounds. And so we're trying to add value to our portfolio companies. Every company needs a little bit something different. This portfolio company may say, the greatest value you can add is on setting up systems and processes, or helping me with training because we're growing so fast we don't even know who to add when. Somewhere else may be franchise development. Somebody else may need back of contract signing operations support. And certainly a Frisch's and a Ruby Tuesday and those revitalization projects need something different. And so if I go out and I just specifically look to hire to a skill set without considering the term you used earlier, the soft skills around it, unintentionally, we could change the entire culture of the organization. And we're a pretty small team at NRD, and we've all got a pretty good gig going, working together. We know what pushes each other's buttons and who's really going to cover on what areas because it's their area of passion or strength. And we kind of get to know that inside the portfolio companies too. So I would say that's one thing that's always top of mind for me, is that if I just hired a skill set, but I don't pay attention to some of those, those soft skills around the edge, it could be detrimental instead of helpful. So that always weighs on my mind.
Well, we go into these decisions in making hiring decisions, particularly senior leaders, with the best of intentions and thinking we get it right. We don't always get it right, though. And it requires some board level massaging of the situation. And so talk about your approach, perhaps learned over the years, to giving critical feedback to a senior leader who may not be getting the job done. I mean, how do you have that conversation?
It's absolutely one of the toughest challenges for me. Our managing partner, Aziz Hashim, and I recently had this conversation where I said, look, I am not the gal that loves to have those tough conversations. I simply don't. They get me all stressed out and I get worked up about them. And so one of the things, it's a crutch, very frankly, but you talked about tactics earlier. For me, one of the tactics is when I start working with somebody new or a new team, I say, how do you best receive feedback? Right? How do you best, do you want me just to hit you between the eyes with it? And as soon as it happens, call it out and just be direct? Do you need it to come, what do they call it? The Oreo theory, right? Where I tell you something good, then I tell you what I really want to tell you, then I tell you something good. Are you somebody that needs that a little bit more? And, that.
They also call that a shit sandwich.
But that too, and I've been very candid with my team. I've really had to work, and this is what I was mentioning to Aziz, I've really had to work on building this muscle. It's not a muscle that is intuitive to me. And I think that probably comes from years of working inside a family business where there was a lot of emotion also involved in all of the work we did. And so I've told my team, look, I have a little PTSD. It takes me a minute to take critical feedback well and process it, that we're all just trying to get better. And so for me, it's really been about asking folks, hey, how do you best receive feedback? And then when those conversations come up and my instinct is to skirt them rather than have them, I always remember about the times that I always know I should have done it sooner, right? By the time you actually have the conversation, you should have done it sooner, and how much better it is for everyone, especially from a place of respect, to respect them enough to have that conversation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. As you alluded to, the not having that conversation makes it worse. And I think it shows I mean, certainly it's disrespectful, perhaps a lack of respect for the person needing the coaching. And certainly it is it's a time drain for everybody. I think it's unnecessary. So it sounds like that muscle's being exercised. So that's good. All right. So to the reward side of the equation, then, incentivizing people when they do well, and this whole notion of compensation philosophy is something that fascinates me. How do you reward managers in the companies that you're working with? I mean, is it shoot for the moon, win the stars kind of a thing where it's heavy on the back end in terms of incentivization? Do you guys like to, work to market and, just pay people for the job they're doing?
Yeah, no, on the private equity side for NRD Capital, and I can only speak to our fund and our fund's philosophy, we know that it's the management teams that are in there day to day that are going to help us execute against the investment thesis, and we want people to be rewarded for that. And so are we the folks that pay over the moon? No, we're not, but we are absolutely wanting to make sure that people, when they walk out of here, had a great experience, know that their time and talent were appreciated and are financially rewarded for that. And, as many times as I can keep the great leaders within my teams somewhere or within the NRD Capital team somewhere, that's a huge win for me. And so, yes, if I go to the top of the pyramid, absolutely being financially incented, not only with base plus annual bonus, and then some sort of exit bonus upon the sale or a transaction happening is kind of the big end of the pie, especially for your C-suite executives. But I'll tell you what, I've been in 2 board meetings in the last 2 weeks for portfolio companies, and just taking the time to acknowledge the hard work that people put into not only preparing for board meetings, but the Saturdays and Sundays that they're working to close the books. And of course, in the restaurant business, the 7 days a week that they're typically working out in the restaurants when you're actually having an opportunity to be in front of a restaurant team. Just taking time to say thank you and asking them about their work. Man, I can't believe how thankful people are for that. And that's just kind of human kindness and interaction in my world. But that's, those are even the basic rewards. We try and do some fun things. You and I are both Chicago-based folks, even though I'm a White Sox fan. I've got a leader of one of my organizations who's a huge thank
There it is.
you. I was waiting for some sounds. Yes. But I've got a leader in my organization who's a huge baseball guy and never been to Wrigley Field before. Right? So let's do that. That is my complete and total honor to get to spend not only that time with him, but to have the opportunity to share that experience. So it's top to bottom, right? It's financial. Everybody's got to pay the bills. Everybody ought to have this be something that helps them secure their longer term future. But it's day-to-day recognition. And when you have the opportunity to, have some fun along the way, man, we got to do that too.
So you've mentioned wearing your heart on your sleeve, being transparent with what you want to say, kind of going above and beyond to make sure people feel valued and welcome. And I just have to tell you, it's not exactly the hallmark of the private equity industry to operate that way. I can imagine that creates some competitive advantage for you going into transactions.
Yeah, we hope so. We really hope so. When I talk to either business founders who are thinking about, taking on an investor, or I talk to professional management teams who are thinking about bringing on an investor, probably the thing that I hear the most often, and they're speaking about our group, not me specifically, but here's how it comes across. They say, Susan, we don't just need your checkbook. We need your expertise. Right. And the your in that case is, again, NRD Capital, not Susan specific. But if you look at it, Aziz spent 30 years as a multi-unit franchisee, right? I spent 14 years as a franchisor and another 8 or 9 as a franchisee. My colleague Rich has been a franchisee. My colleague John has been a franchisee. And so, my colleague Sean is an operator outside of the franchise world, but really down operating businesses. it's a really differentiating factor for us. I will tell you, though, there's some hangups in there that we're continuing to work through, which is we tend to find the day-to-day business operations so exciting and so fascinating because it's where our comfort spot is, that we got to be reminded to pick our head back up and get back up to board level or up to 30 or 50,000 feet, right? But where we can add value, we absolutely love being able to do that. And a lot of times it comes through this people piece. And, 20 years in the franchise industry of being able to help a portfolio company go find the next great hire because I met them 10 years ago, or any of my colleagues met somebody at a networker. It's really cool to watch the networks come together.
So, closing question as we wind down here. If you were to come back on this show in a year and report on whether or not you successfully tackled the single biggest team or people related opportunity that you have in front of you or the business today, what would you be telling us happened to the extent you can share?
That's a good one. Wow. There's a reason this is your day job. Gosh, right now my teams are pretty well settled, but I would say probably that it continues to just be around relationship management, right? And I think that's really important for all of us that are in any kind of HR capacity, is that, right, we're trying to build relationships while keeping everybody as effective as possible. And it's just being able to have a high enough IQ and EQ. IQ, because I'm obviously in a world that is highly tactical now, but also the EQ to know that every relationship has to be managed a little bit differently. It's not just here's the box and here's how I'm going to interact with every team that I have the chance to be a part of. So I would tell you that I hopefully get better at that, even though it tends to be a strength. I don't want to buy my own press on it because there's always areas that we can improve.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the final word you've been learning from Susan Beth, Chief Operating Officer at NRD Capital. Susan, thank you for being with us on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Adam.
That is a wrap for this week's episode of the Best Team Wins podcast, where we're featuring entrepreneurs and business leaders whose exceptional approach to the people side of their business has led to incredible results. My name is Adam Robinson, author of the book, The Best Team Wins, which you can find online at www.thebestteamwins.com. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you here next week.
Thanks for listening to the Best Team Wins podcast with Adam Robinson. You can find out more information about Adam and his book, The Best Team Wins, Building Your Business Through Predictive Hiring, at thebestteamwins.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.